Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today I'm going to continue my series on a new story of humanity, how to change the world for the better. This is part 8, an artificial local maxima. So the last section we talked about why human nature can change because it adapts to the environment. So it's highly dependent on the environment we build for ourselves that determines what type of behaviors that we exhibit, what type of desires even that we typically have. So I mentioned something called the artificial or the local maxima last time. So I'm going to go into that in this section. Let us begin. Somewhere along the way of evolution in our pre sapient past, we gained the ability to perceive ourselves. With that came the ability to also see how we could better manipulate the environment to benefit the future versions of ourselves. But that also creates the conditions in which certain behaviors are rarely ever given the option to change, since we pre-configured, i.e., rigged, the environment to cater to those behaviors. This creates a sort of local maxima, where we reach an evolutionary dead end that seems like the best way to adapt, but is actually worse than other possible adaptations. In fact, it was likely the stabilization of the natural environment itself that led us down this path of stabilizing our own societies at the cost of our adaptability. There's a lot of evidence showing that during the pre Holocene era, i.e., before 11 to 9,000 years ago, the climate swung wildly every few centuries. On average, it was quite a bit colder than in the Holocene era, but temperatures swung between ice cold and kind of cold. Simplifying here. So just to make sure people understand here, I know people are gonna be like, oh, that means climate change isn't real, right? Climate change isn't human caused, but no. If you see here, right, this is all below 1 degree Celsius. Like this is all fairly cold. This is what I mean by here between somewhat cold and kind of cold, like really cold and kind of cold. So this translates to Fahrenheit. I think that's like what 30 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that, something crazy. Like it's cold, all right? It's freezing level, all right? That's why so many parts of the world was full of ice. This is why you call the ice age. But even after the ice age period, right? You see this last ice age and what they think happened here, right? The big shift is there's not a clear story yet. It's not a clear understanding of what happened, but they call this the younger dryas period. And what they think happened, I'm not sure if I go into it or not, but what they think happened is a comet, a small comet may have hit somewhere in Africa or something like that, and caused like global, not exactly warming, but yeah, well, yeah, global warming, but it wasn't to the extent that we have today, right? And for those that think, oh, there's no human caused global warming, you have to ask if clearly the temperatures are getting warmer. The question is why. We haven't seen an asteroid hit. There has been no super volcanoes in the last couple thousand years. So yeah. Anyways, so they think a comet hit some area in Africa, and what people don't realize is that a lot of Africa, specifically to the Sahara Desert, used to be an ocean or at least a series of saltwater seas, and this is why they actually regularly find whale bones and other fossils in the desert, right? Because it used to be full of water and a lot of that area was grassland, right? So a lot of our ancestors and the, civilizations before this period of 10,000 years ago, lived in this area of Africa that was extremely lush and vibrant and full of, life and things like that. A lot of really resource rich. But whatever happened there, climate hit and my personal theory is that this is actually the source of a lot of those flood, stories in a lot of the religions. Like it's not just Christianity that has this; many other religions have this story of a great flood. And my kind of personal theory here is that an asteroid hit, these waterlands, these wetlands of northern Africa, and caused the flooding across that entire area. Right, flooded most of Africa, maybe even much of the Middle East, and that was where the bulk of civilization was for thousands of years, right? So, um, yeah, I think this is a very important aspect to remember because people like to think that, oh, we just got smarter all of a sudden and I thought, yes, let's go start farming. But in actuality, no, like people have been farming for a very long time, but they couldn't farm on a large scale because the climate would change drastically and it was too cold in most areas to really farm. Anyways, if you recall, we humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. This is something that a lot of people still don't realize to this day. And I mean humans. The Homo sapiens that evolved in Africa 300,000 years ago had a very much similar type of brain and body as us today. Humans that migrated out of Africa roughly 60 to 30,000 years ago ended up procreating with and outcompeting the other hominids, some of which were quote unquote smarter and stronger and more violent than us in many ways, such as the Neanderthals. It's theorized that the Neanderthals were strong enough to single handedly take down a mammoth. That's big, all right? Mammoths were bigger than elephants. Meanwhile, humans would hunt down the mammoth with large war parties until it collapsed from exhaustion and a ton of our spears. Furthermore, whereas the Neanderthals likely subsisted solely on big game, i.e., the giant mammals that used to exist during the ice ages, humans primarily subsisted on foraging various smaller animals and plants. So when the glaciers melted, and the giant animals died off from the lack of food or overhunting, the Neanderthals died with them, and we thrived. Again, this is a really important point because, again, a lot of people just don't understand that we were not, simple caveman 300,000 years ago, like in the first evolution. Our evolution of intelligence has been in the workings for over 2 million years. All right. So, like, we split off from the monkeys, from the apes and chimps and stuff 2 million years ago. That's when the first couple hominids started, walking on two legs and making fire and all this other stuff, right? So you may have heard like Homo erectus. That was one of our ancestors. Was existed a couple 100,000 years ago. On like I think 800,000, maybe even longer than that. Um, uh, Neopostolisis. I don't know. You can look it up. There's a whole bunch of them, right? Um, but during our time, like during those 300,000 years in which we existed, in which our Homo sapiens, the Homo sapiens sapiens evolved, there were like a dozen other hominids with similar levels of intelligence existing at the same time. And I personally think there's some really interesting stories here that we have no idea about. I personally think, and this is going to get into not quite conspiracy theory, but like edge science, edge archaeology, I personally think that they may have been advanced civilizations um, in some shape or form, maybe not to our level, or maybe in a different way, right? Maybe they were as advanced as us, but in a different way um, in that time. And there's a lot of other, interesting things here, but I'll probably get into that in another video. But all this to say that it is a fact that um, there existed hominids, human like creatures with our level of intelligence for over 300,000 years at least, right? And so the idea that we suddenly got smarter over the last 10,000 years is extremely, extremely disrespectful and incorrect, right? Based on the archaeological data. Um, that's the thing with evolution. It's an ongoing process because the environment is always changing. A life form may have adapted really well to a particular environment, but then something changes and its strength becomes its greatest weakness. The dinosaurs roamed this earth for millions of years and were able to grow to incredible sizes. But then that comet struck, and the only dinosaurs that could survive were the small ones that eventually became birds. It's survival of the fittest, which has very little to do with strength or some objectively better form, but simply a better fit for the environment it is in, right? And I realized, unfortunately, I didn't really go that much into local maxima, which I should have. I think I go more into it later, but just to cover this, what I mean by artificial local maxima is that, you know, um, as I pointed out here, and I could probably get a nice little picture here, But in a local maxima, you can get to a point where you think you've evolved to the max, right? But reality, right, is that there is a better design out there, right? This is where we are now. But in order to get to that better design, you would have to lose some of the benefits that you gained in order to, gain other benefits. So, for instance, like, there was this great video about this talking about like why don't zebras have wings or something like that, right? Wings could be a great way, but in order for zebras to get wings, they would have to lose some of their limbs, like one of their four limbs, two of them probably, and then turn those into flat. Like it's that transition going from walking to flying is a huge transition, and they would have to lose some of that ability in order to gain, a greater ability. Um, but that's not how evolution works. Evolution just steadily tries to go up, right? So, um, and that upwards motion is in relation to the environment itself that is in, right? It tries to get better and better in that environment. If at any point its adaptations makes it worse in that environment, it will most likely go extinct. And worse again in terms of its ability to reproduce, right? This is a very important notion. I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure if I go into it. Don't remember. I hope I did. But it's important to recognize that when we started farming, the only real benefit it gained us was the ability to reproduce faster. That's it. And it wasn't reproduced better. Like they actually see this in ecological data. For the first one couple hundred years, almost 1,000 years when we started farming en masse, people had less nutrition, right? Kids were more malnourished for a long period of time, but there were more of them, right? Families would have, a half a dozen to a couple dozen children, right? At any point in time, while before in hunter-gatherer societies, they only had one child every 2 to 4 years, right? They would make sure they spend more time with each child. And so it was better for the children and for the village, but it wasn't as competitive as a farming village that could pop out dozens of children like rats or something, right? And that's a good, kind of imagery is to kind of view us as like rats during this period of farming. It's not that farming was better; it's that it allowed us to reproduce more, right? And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Just because we came up with these technologies does not mean that we were smarter or more evolved or something like that, or we were more evolved, but only in our ability to reproduce at a faster rate. Even though that didn't necessarily mean that our offspring was better off. So, um, yeah, like there's a lot of important things about this topic, about this idea. Highly suggest folks look it up. But yeah, that's it for today. I'm super excited to get into the rest of this next time. Our delusions of human nature. And as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.